Support for this podcast comes from Frito-Lay in the 2023 Snack Bracket Championship. The Frito-Lay Snack-It Challenge is underway, and fans are voting on their favorite snacks to crown champion. We're talking about prime-time matchups between the best 64 snacks in the land. Will Ruffles Ridges reign supreme? Can Doritos defend their dynasty? Or will Smart Food use their smarts for a surprise upset? Only you can decide. Get in on all the action for a chance to win up to $1,000 or a year's worth of snacks. Let your snacks be heard. Just go to fritolaysnacket.sbnation.com to vote and enter for a chance to win. No purchase necessary. Sweepstakes ends April 3rd, 2023. Void where prohibited. Year's worth of snacks awarded in the form of 52 coupons, each good for one bag of chips. See official rules at fritolaysnacket.sbnation.com.
Welcome to the Black and Gold Banneret Podcast. Jeff, Sharon, Brian Murphy, and Andrew Gluchov joining us. Eric Lopez is taking the night off. No doubt he spent way too many early mornings watching the KBO, and he can't really handle it. Unlike you, Brian Murphy, you can handle it.
Woo!
Still hopped up. I know. You've picked out the right mixture of caffeine in order to make it happen, right?
Well, let's.
I don't think Eric drinks coffee. Does he drink coffee? I don't think so.
I don't think he does. But let's kick off the show with the top story, Jeff. Ben Lively got injured in his last KBO start, but thankfully he will make his next rotation turn, which would come, I believe, Saturday. So our hearts were in our throats there for a minute, but Ben Lively's okay for the Samsung Lions.
Fabulous. That does it for our Ben Lively update here on the Black and Gold Banneret Podcast. We've got that out of the way. You can follow us, as always, at UCF_Banneret, Facebook.com/blackandgoldbanneret, and, of course, blackandgoldbanneret.com, your home for UCF sports on SB Nation. Drew, what's going on, man? This is your first time in the hot seat. What's up?
Oh, man, now and hot seat indeed. Getting a late notice. Just doing the quarantine thing. We're hopefully getting back to a sense of normalcy here. But as we know, college sports is anything but normal.
Well, we're finding that out in a big way today. We're going to talk about some stories we got on the site, some little news and notes bits here and there, some news on Joe Sheridan, some news on Darin Green, which Murph has been following very closely. If you follow him at _Murphy, you would know about that already. But we are going to start with some, I think this is bigger than it's really being played right now. Danny White went through the car wash a little bit today on the radio. He spoke on Sirius XM's Mad Dog Radio, and he also spoke on ESPN 580 earlier today, and was asked in a couple places, in both of those places, I should say, about what's the situation with UCF and the possibility of playing football in the fall with or without fans. And lo and behold, a lot of stuff came from this. This is the bite that we're going to play from the interview on Sirius XM. And thanks are due to former New York Giant quarterback Danny Cannell, Brian Murphy, for tweeting this out. And we were able to get a hold of it. Here it is.
If you don't have your students on campus, can you play a college football game on your facility?
I don't think that's undoable. Where I have bigger concerns financially is if we sprint to the solution of playing games with no fans in the stands. For us, that's about a $30 million problem that I don't have an answer to. And, longer storied, larger stadium programs, it's a much bigger financial problem. So I hope that we explore every option to safely have fans in the stands. I know we will. And if there's not a path in the fall, I think we should also be talking about spring football, if that would allow for us to realize that game day revenue. We're a nonprofit. It's not like that money's going to some big coffers. It's going to support a student-athlete experience for 435 kids across 16 different teams. And those are critical dollars for our operation.
Jim Harbaugh today, the Michigan coach, made a statement on ESPN today and said that generally, he would be comfortable playing and coaching in empty stadiums, and that his players feel the same way, and that it's better than nothing. When you hear that, what goes through your mind? What you say? What?
I'd say, why wouldn't we wait till the spring to see if there is an opportunity to have fans in the stands? And if there's not, then we're still in the same boat, and we can play the games without fans in the stands. But I don't know where they're coming up with $100+ million to replace that game day revenue, which I'm sure that's what it is for them with 100,000 seat stadium. For us, we're a $70 million budget. About 35 of it comes from football, and about 30 of that is what happens on game day. So I don't have a solution for that. We're relying on those dollars, and a lot of athletic departments across the country are. So,
all right. So we heard some news there, which we'll talk about in a second. Here's the soundbite from the Scott Inez show on ESPN 580 earlier today. You hear some similar things, but a little bit different shade.
I think a big part of what makes college football special is the pageantry of everything that happens on campus on game day. Even the things that happen 4 or 5 hours before the game, the tailgating and all the traditions that we do. So I'd hate to see us play games without those things happening. And so hopefully we're in a position come end of August, early September, where it's safe to do that. Obviously, we're going to have to change some of what we do and make sure that it's a clean and safe environment. But if it's not, I'd hope that we look to postpone it before we look to play games without fans. From a mission standpoint, that's why we built an on-campus stadium, the student experience, certainly the experience for our student athletes to play in front of all those fans. There's a lot of things that make it special. But financially, our reality is that's about a $30 million problem for us if we play football games and realize our TV revenue. But for us, the huge chunk is the game day revenue.
All right. Well, Danny White, first of all, unveiling some interesting numbers as far as UCF's budget is concerned. Wow, $30 million from football, $35 million from fans. UCF is running, according to him, in that soundbite from Sirius XM, an operating budget of about $70 million, which is $8 million more than the fiscal year 18 number that we saw in that USA Today database that used to come out. I don't know if they're still doing that anymore, but this sounded. I don't know about you guys. This makes me nervous. This is the first time I've really felt nervous about UCF sports and whether or not this is going to happen in the fall in whatever capacity. It sounds to me, we were talking before we went on, guys, it sounds to me like White is trying to set up the options of best case scenario, play in the fall with fans, but doesn't look like that's going to happen. So I'd rather we play in the spring if it means we can play with fans. And if not, we'll just roll the dice with the spring anyway. But I don't know, man. This made me nervous. Am I wrong here, Brian, or does this make you nervous too?
No, I think you have to take it with a measure of trepidation here because there's real honesty here, and you can hear that in Danny's voice even. The way he's saying, this is what's going to happen to us if we don't have fans at our football games. And he's, he understands, and he also acknowledges that not just UCF, but many other programs are weighing these same problems as well. And he basically says it out front, if we can't have fans, then we should, postpone until the spring. He also does mention in one of those clips that if there's no fans still allowed for football in the spring, that they would still then play games. So that was interesting to me. It seems like, no matter what, we would have football in the spring latest with or without fans, but certainly one, they want to have fans, two, they want to have it in the fall. But you can sense that maybe Danny White just doesn't see having football having a full stadium in the fall as a realistic possibility. So he's already planning for the next best case scenario, which would be having fans available in the spring. The fact is, no one knows if either of those things will occur. And I'm kind of curious as to the way he said it. I don't know if there is a hint of nuance in his quote there about fans. Does he mean that it'd only be right to come back once there are no fan restrictions and there's a possibility for a full stadium, or would he allow, or would he be begrudgingly okay with a fifth or a quarter, a share of an open stadium as opposed to no fans. I don't know. It seems like he's all or nothing. And that's I'd love more clarification on that from him if I ever got a chance to talk to him.
Yeah, I mean, because the other half of that is, and I'm sure they're thinking about this, like if we come back with a football season where, you only have like a quarter capacity, right? 45,000,
Mm-hmm.
you're talking, you're talking like about 10,000, 10 to 11,000.
Yeah.
How do you even enforce that?
Right.
That's the hard part about that, because we've talked about this before. He's also having to deal with the possibility of liability, right? And I know, and fans all the time are like, oh, just make everybody sign a waiver. It is not that simple, okay? Stop saying it is. Just like it's not that, we'll just have a vaccine in 12 months. I don't know. It's not. It is biomedical science is not that easy. Stop wishing for the magic bullet. It's not coming. Okay. Mm-hmm. Drew, the part that I really got nervous about was where he said, if we don't get that, we're going to have a $30 million hole in our budget that, frankly, I don't know how to figure out.
Well, the number doesn't surprise me. I've heard here and there that UCF banks $3 to $4 million per home football game net. That makes a lot of sense. It could be rounded up a little bit, but you're looking at 7 home games this season?
7 home games times 4, it's about $28 million.
So you're looking around 28. 30 is a fair roundup. So that's not an unfair number that you're losing with gates and concessions and all that other jazz. Then you got to,
merchandise sales and all, yeah.
Well, to even add on that, what about Golden Knight Club donations, booster donations? Is that going to take a hit? Are they going to have to issue refunds there as well because they're no longer getting the product that comes with it? So this could be including that estimate within there, but I think 30 million is a very fair number. Now, Ohio State originally said that if they play with no fans, they're looking at a $50 million loss, and they came out recently and said that they're looking at plans based on what the Miami Dolphins are doing at a 20 to 25% capacity, closer to 20. And that would get about 22,000 fans in the stands approximately. But even then, if you're looking at 50 million loss on 7 home games for Ohio State, even 20% capacity isn't going to cut it. There's going to be some massive losses. And UCF does not have the $10+ million reserve that a school like Ohio State does have. So, yes, if I'm a UCF fan, I would be a little nervous at the prospect of playing without fans because the financial loss will be devastating.
The latest look at the NCAA finances from USA Today was back in the 2017-18 school year. Ohio State that year was 3rd among schools that they were able to find out. Remember, these are all public schools, so they have to make their budgets public. There were no private schools involved, so we don't know what Notre Dame had or Baylor or any of that. But Ohio State was 3rd among the schools they listed with a total revenue of $205 million back, and that's back in 2017-2018. Obviously, probably higher now. I think I wouldn't be surprised if they were probably up in the $210 to $215 million range right now. $50 million hole in Ohio State's budget, you're still looking at, at least $150 million that they can still take care of. That they can. I'm not saying it's not a big hit for them, because it is, but it's nowhere near the 40 to 50% budget hit that UCF would take. I mean, that's the part that's. I mean, if you're whacking almost half of your revenue, you're saying goodbye to a bunch of sports. Your capital projects are done, and I mean, I don't know what that looks like. Now it makes sense to me why the group of 5 schools wrote that letter a couple weeks ago to the NCAA requesting basically a waiver on sports requirements for a couple years, because if that's the gun barrel that everyone's staring down, and UCF actually seems to be one of the more well-off financially, athletic departments in the group of 5. Like if it's looking that bad for UCF, I mean, imagine how bad it looks for FAU. Imagine how bad it looks for the MAC schools or the Sun Belt, for half the Mountain West. That's going to be a major crunch on every sport, on every program. It's like that could get ugly. That could get real ugly in a hurry, Murph.
No, absolutely. And some of those waivers you mentioned, like the waiving of the football minimum attendance requirement, those were pushed through, some of those today by the D1 Council.
Yeah. I want to talk about that too, because the council actually did vote today, Wednesday, May 20th, for those of you who are watching at home, to lift the moratorium on the voluntary workouts for football and basketball players effective June 1st. As a growing number, this is from the Associated Press, by the way, as a growing number of college leaders express confidence that fall sports will be possible in some form, despite concerns about the coronavirus pandemic. I think the thing that we were talking about earlier was, yeah, we're kind of like hitting the upswing, but we're really going to know in another 2 to 3 weeks after, if all these states start opening up and their economies start opening up, are we going to start seeing an uptick again in infections and the death rate? And then on top of that, what do? Do we start shutting things down again and saying, no, we did it too early? And then if the fall sports come back, what's going to be affected? I mean, obviously, it seems like the two sports that could be affected the most are basketball and football, right? Because basketball is indoors, and we know how COVID-19 spreads, in close gatherings and indoors. So what two sports have the most close gatherings and are indoors? Basketball, obviously other sports like volleyball too, but basketball and football. I mean, you could get away with it in golf, you can get away with it in tennis, to a certain degree with baseball and softball you can get away with it. But I don't know, man. This feels like the worst of all scenarios. But as far as it feels like they're now dipping their toe back into trying to get things back to normal, right, Murph, with this council vote?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is a big announcement, and so basically it means that up until now there had been a moratorium on on-campus activity through May, and this was an examination today to extend it through June, and they basically lifted it and said, if you work with your state and local governments, you can come back and have voluntary practices on campus in those sports: men's basketball, women's basketball, football. And it only goes through June. Like these voluntary practices could only take place between June 1st and June 30th. So, and we'll see what UCF decides to do. Now it's up to them as far as picking a date of when they would want to have their athletes come back, to on campus. And we've seen a couple of schools already. I believe Ohio State said they were aiming for June 8th. I think I just read Wyoming is going to come back for I think it's football on June 1st.
LSU said LSU Scott Woodward. Sorry to interrupt, but Scott Woodward, the AD at LSU, said his school is preparing to welcome back its student athletes after the SEC's closure of athletics facilities to students is slated to end on May 31st. So that was conference mandated. Louisiana as a state is kind of one of the least restrictive states out there in terms of COVID-19, even though they're being pretty hard hit right now. So yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, absolutely. Again, it depends on state and local governments. Obviously, in Florida, we're wide open relatively. I mean, we've still got WWE going on. We've got UFC going on in Jacksonville. So it would be they would come back. I think the other issue, obviously, is then you have to ask about developing a testing protocol, because you're going to have athletes around each other, and what do those practices look like? And, don't we need to have some sort of testing protocol? Right now, there is none set up right now, and it's up to both the schools and political decision makers to possibly develop and get tests. How would they do that? Do they, how much would that cost? Where are those tests coming from? These are all things to be worked out. But I think, the overarching point that everybody points at and smiles toward is the fact that we are going to have, certainly in Florida, at some point in the next couple of weeks through June, we're going to have football players and possibly basketball players and women's basketball players on campus practicing. I look forward to bringing that up tomorrow. We have an interview tomorrow with UCF football player Trey Nixon, And as a player, and from his point of view, I'm interested to hear what he has to say about that. But I'm sure most players are just happy because it does carry that sense of normalcy and like we're going back on campus.
Right. It still makes me kind of wonder about what about with students coming back. I saw a report today out of Syracuse that Syracuse University was looking at taking their fall calendar and moving it up. Like they would start the fall semester in August, mm-hmm. and then they would end it by Thanksgiving. So kind of playing around. But they're a private university. That's the other thing. I mean, whatever decisions UCF has to make, they have to make it in concert with the board. But we are seeing some other indications of it now. This is the other thing I think was interesting from the Danny White perspective. Is it feels like he's kind of become I don't know if de facto is the right word, but more or less a de facto spokesperson for the non-power conference schools here, because it was interesting that he came out with those sound bites that we mentioned earlier. One day, actually the same day that Gordon Gee, the former president at Ohio State, who's now the president at West Virginia, said, here's his quote to Pete Thamel of Yahoo Sports. He said, we know this, quote, if we are going to play football in the fall, which we are, the latest we could open up to our student athletes would be about July 15th. And he mentioned that there were, here's another quote from him later on. He said, quote, among the Big 12, we have near consensus, both among the athletic directors and the presidents. We may be tweaking it, but every one of our schools is determined to open. Every one of our schools is determined to play football. Every one of our schools is determined that we'll follow strict protocols in terms of health and safety of our athletes and fans. So this sounds like the power school. I know this is going to sound like I'm throwing my tinfoil hat on. So Murph, I apologize. So Drew, I'm going to direct this to you. This sounds like it is ripe for when the rubber meets the road. You're going to have the power conferences pushing to play. We need the revenue. We got to play. And then your group of five, and maybe some smaller level P5s, but the ones that they don't listen to, right? Like Vandy and Wake Forest, are going to be like, no, hold up, we can't go. We're not ready yet. We need the revenue, and we need full state. We need full stadiums, like Danny White was saying. We need a full stadium in order to hit anything close to our budget. Where Ohio State, they have 105,000 seat stadium. They can fill it with 25,000, and they'll be not fine, but fine, right? Is this not setting up for the just an ugly divorce? I feel like.
Well, let's be honest. The P5 would love nothing more than to break free and be their own, without having to walk away from the NCAA. I think they want to avoid trying to do the official break, because I think they realized that it's more than just a football game. And, the NCAA does a lot. They facilitate a lot. And with, basketball and those other sports, Power 5 schools need other Division I schools when it comes to scheduling. Baseball, basketball, all those sports outside of football. So when you're basically going to be cutting your nose to spite your face. And when it comes to Gordon Gee, you have to go way back when he was the president of Ohio State, and he made a really off-putting comment about TCU at the time, who was still in the Mountain West, calling them sisters of the poor regarding to their rise through the BCS. That's Gordon Gee. He's good for a soundbite. He really is. But there's definitely a sense of elitism that comes out of him that you almost have to take a little bit with a grain of salt. It comes down to the fact of, schools are going to have to do what's best for them. I know on ESPN, they were passing them around talking. And the question now becomes, what if an entire coaching staff, the offensive coaching staff or defensive coach, what if they become, sick? What do you do? What if the defensive line
Newsflash,
sick?
a lot of those guys are old.
Yeah, well, and especially the coaching staff, but even players. What if players all, get sick in a batch because they work together, they eat together, they go
train together,
they train together, they work out. What if one gets sick, gets the other sick? What do? Do you put an offensive lineman out at nose tackle? Do you even play the game? Those are questions that haven't been answered, and I believe it was TCU's athletic director was recording an ESPN article talking about just that, and he's getting these deer in headlight looks from the coaches of, wait, what? And the truth is, this is stuff we have to think about. This is reality now. We have a new reality in front of us where we can't take what we have for granted, and we have to be very methodical. And I think fans and coaches alike, and you're not seeing as much from administrators who actually have to deal with the dollars and cents of this, but mostly from fans, and then to a lesser extent coaches, want to do this at all costs. Just go. Well, we can't just go. We have to be smart about it, or else we're only going to make it worse.
Right.
In the case of coaches, there could be lives on the line. Have you seen some of these coaches? Some of them are not the pinnacle of health. And I don't know about you, but I wouldn't want to be responsible for one of my coaches getting sick and potentially passing away from something because we pushed too hard too fast. Now, I want to hit something real quick that you talked about, Jeff, with the group of 5 requesting a waiver for the number of men's sports being offered. I think this is going to come to a head because the NCAA kind of punted on it, but Central Michigan dropped a sport. I believe it was baseball, and they're under the minimum now for men's sports. I think they only offer 5 going into the fall. So something's got to give between Division I status and the number of sports that are going to be able to be offered, because we're seeing sports getting cut at a alarming pace. Tennis, baseball especially is getting hit hard, cross country and track, and the
track and men's track and field was the sport that Central Michigan ended. I think it was.
Oh, was that one?
Yeah, there was another one. It was Bowling Green, also in the MAC, canceled their baseball program too.
Yeah, and I'm getting mixed up with Furman, who also dropped their baseball program.
Yeah.
So we're seeing the sports hit, and these are all D1 schools. So you brought it up. Something's got to give, and right. I think the NCAA is gonna have to agree on letting it slide for a while, because this isn't going to get any better. UCF, who's a good FBS school in the Group of 5 conference, is talking about a potential $30 million shortfall. I mean, holy geez.
Right.
East Carolina's planning on dropping a sport, if not more.
Yeah,
worse shape than UCF is. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but they don't pull in the money that UCF does.
Yeah.
So
I wanted to bring that up too. There was a tweet. I'm sorry, Drew, but Stephen Igo, who covers ECU for 247 Hoist the Colors, he said their interim chancellor says the athletics fiscal sustainability working group's report, which sounds ominous itself, recommends the reduction of sports. Overall feeling is the Pirates need a new strategic plan to compete in the AAC and hold up financially. When you're talking about hey, we need to blow some things up so we can stay at the with the AAC, God bless the American. I love the American, but that's a bad sign for ECU. And when I saw that, my feeling was oh man, this is coming for this is not just coming for the Sun Belt and the MAC.
No, it's hitting everyone. It's you may even see some P5s, making some drastic moves. I mean, Iowa State was the first one to start coach cutting as far as salaries go. We've seen Boise State furlough coaches just to get them off the books for a little bit, during those dead periods. This is going well beyond, the Colonial Athletic Conference or the MAC, or even CUSA, because FIU's dropped a sport. This is going up to the AAC, and that's your top end non-power conference right there. So no one is safe at this point.
Yeah. I want to note too that ECU. So I did the research on this, and I looked at all the schools in the American now that UConn's out, and ECU actually sponsors, as of right now, 20 sports, which they're one of 3 schools that sponsor 20 sports. Memphis and Temple are the others. What sets them apart, though, with ECU is that they, based on the sports that they sponsor, they also give out 252.2 scholarships based on the scholarship limits for the various sports that they sponsor. All of the sports that they have are in the American. You got some schools like the ones that I'm looking at that are really in trouble, I think, are ECU, based on what we talked about. Temple, which has 3 sports that fall outside the American, and they give out the most scholarships, 257.5. And then SMU gives out 248.8, with one of them, equestrian, which is an insanely expensive sport and takes up 15 scholarships. Being one of the 17 sports that they sponsor. By the way, for comparison's sake, UCF sponsors 233.6 scholarships in 16 different sports, which is the NCAA minimum, the lowest in the conference. Aside from Wichita State, which doesn't have football, is Tulane with 210.8. USF is 226.2, 19 sports. Cincinnati 235.7, 19 sports. Houston 225.8, 17 sports. So everyone's kind of clustering around that 220 to 230 range, but those other schools are in that 240 to 250 range. And man, this is going to hit them hard. We talked about, everyone uses Tulsa as a punchline. Tulsa's at 17 sports and 230 scholarships. So, sorry, that was a lot of data to throw at everybody, but that kind of gives you an idea of the really hard budgetary choices that people are going to make. I want to wrap this segment with one thing, Murph, because you sent out that article from Andrea Adelson and Heather Dinich over at ESPN that started with that little anecdote about Mackenzie Milton, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, and anybody who is interested in knowing, really overall the difficulties and questions that remain regarding testing in college football with college football players and programs should read this article on ESPN. It's really in depth. It's a huge long read, but it does start out by mentioning that Mackenzie Milton went in for a coronavirus test. He went to the drive up UCF facility outside Garage A about a week ago, according to this article, because he had a sore throat initially, and then the next day he started developing a fever. And in this time, when you start developing a fever, I understand he was starting to get scared, and he thought oh my God, before he got the test, he was thinking he would hate if he was getting people sick while he's on the campus training, and he would just feel awful. Fortunately, as the article lays out, he went in, the test came back negative, and he his symptoms went away within the next couple of days. But I guess the news is one, Mackenzie Milton had a coronavirus test and kind of had a bit of a scare. And two, as you read the article through, it shows you how many pitfalls there are when you talk about college football coming back and testing protocols and how to keep everybody in line so that, as Andrew says, no one does something that ends up getting someone else, afflicted and possibly worse. But anyway, it was just a really fantastic piece by Andrea and Heather. Yeah,
and I think the one quote that stood out for me was from Bob, our old friend Bob Bowlesby, the commissioner of the Big 12. He said, quote, "I think it's unrealistic to think that we won't have positive tests on campus and positive tests in the locker rooms. Somebody somewhere is going to have that occur, and they'll have to deal with it." Okay, how?
Well, we've already seen that, in UFC,
Yeah.
with one of their fighters being tested positive the night before a big event.
Well, shoot, Rudy Gobert tested positive and shut down the NBA the whole
yes,
week.
But that was there was no, obviously for Rudy, there was no care, there's not as much urgency over the coronavirus. That was the urgency moment. Now we're a little bit more understanding of what we need to do. There are still people being found positive. There was a handful of people of players in the Premier League that tested positive. So I believe that's right. I believe that there is an inevitability that some player or possibly more than one on a team will test positive for the coronavirus this season. The issue then is, how do you contain it to only those one or two players? How do you make sure that it hasn't spread? And, when do you test? If you test a guy on Thursday, let's say you have a Friday game and it's on the road, do you test a guy on Thursday? And if he comes back negative, well, then he could have picked it up on Friday. And now you're in the dark because the Thursday test came back negative. Mm-hmm. And there's just so many things that you've got to worry about. And also, not even mentioning, like, do we have enough tests to make this happen? And should we? I know people have an issue with this, but there's a doctor quoted in the article about, I know people want college football back, and we need people to get tested. But should we be spending all these testing resources in this moment toward an entertainment product?
Right.
And I understand people flip their lids when they hear that, but it's true. Same thing's going through with baseball right now. Like, it's a huge business. It creates billions of dollars. We've talked half this segment about how important football is to UCF's livelihood, but college football, as it is an entertainment business. And when this country is still at a testing shortage, there is an ethical issue there that is brought up in the article written by Andrea and Heather that schools will need to confront and get over. And I'm sure I just lost 10 followers.
Well, that's okay. That's okay. You still have us. That's all you need. I will say this, though. I think that this is the time, I think, when the athletes themselves have the most power, right? Mm-hmm. And I say the athletes. I should say the student athletes. Like, this is the time when, they can step up to the plate and say, look, we're the ones whose futures are being bandied about by these old white guys in suits. So, with bow ties on, so let us be the one. How about we have a little bit of say in what we decide to do?
So are you pressing for a union?
I wouldn't mind seeing a student athlete association of some kind.
That's good. I know. Was it Dan Wolken wrote about that this week?
Yeah.
That just seems so difficult.
I'm not the biggest fan of Dan Wolken, but it does seem like it's extremely difficult to pull up. But there are some organizations that are trying to do it, but I think it would have to be on I think the way it would work is it would end up being on a school by school stat. Like, you won't get like a national student athletes union. You'll get like a UCF student athletes union, a USF student athletes union, because those are the ones that will determine policy for each individual, student athlete body, for example.
Well, don't forget, Northwestern tried this.
Right.
It didn't work.
Well, it didn't work because I think it had the atmosphere was so negative toward it, and they actually tried to be certified as a union, and I think. And that's where I think they ran into trouble. But that doesn't mean that they can't affect policy one way or the other, because I got news for you. If UCF's football team, this is an entirely hypothetical conversation, I know, but if UCF's football team comes up and they're like, hey, man, we do not feel safe playing this opening game against whoever, if it's North Carolina or whatever, and we're going to, we're not going to play because of, I don't know, whatever condition you can possibly think of, because we just don't know at this point. Everything's moving so quickly. And could you imagine if, what's going to happen then? Like, are we seriously going to see somebody from UCF come in and say, if you guys don't play, you forfeit all your scholarships? How bad would that look?
That seems drastic.
Well, I wouldn't rule it out in this day and age with how everything seems to be moving, but there's that.
Speaking of hypotheticals, Jeff, we should probably go into break.
Yeah. So anyway, just to wrap it up, it's moving so quickly, and And it's going to continue doing that. I mean, our heads are going to be spinning for a while on this, and a lot of really tough decisions are going to be made. And man, I like you guys, I hope that, in UCF's case, those decisions are the right ones to be made. And I think that the most important people to consider are the student athletes. It's not the fans. I'm sorry, guys. Love you, but those are the people who need to make the call. And because these people are, they're doing this for your entertainment, and but they're student athletes as well. Fans, God love you, but you're not that important. And at least if I was a student athlete, that's what I would be saying. All right, stick around. We'll be right back. Speaking of hypotheticals, like Murph was saying, I wrote a magnum opus, and Murph edited it. I say, quote, fact, end quote, checked it. What happened 25 years ago? Why didn't UCF join the conference at all? And what could have happened if they did? We'll go down memory lane, and we'll explore the alternate universes that may have spurred off from that. Stick around. We'll be right back.
Today's episode is brought to you by Cars.com. With over 2 million vehicles and 50,000 more added every day, Cars.com will match you with the perfect car for you, your budget, your life, your style. And if you're ready to say goodbye to your current car, Cars.com will get you an instant offer to cash it in. Just start by entering your license plate and get matched with a local dealer who will write you the check. So whether you're looking to buy or sell, just go to Cars.com. It's magical.
All right, welcome back to the Black and Gold Banneret Podcast. Jeff Sharon, Brian Murphy, Andrew Gluchov joining us here, sitting in for Eric Lopez. Eric's doing fine, don't worry. So I wanted to go back and revisit the magnum opus that I wrote, Brian and Drew, about. I thought about that. This idea has been like swimming around in my brain for like a long time now, and I thought, and last week was what if week at SB Nation. I was like, oh, okay, I'm going to dive in. And I thought it would be like 1,000 words or something. I end up writing almost 5,000 words on the question, what if UCF joined Conference USA in 1995? And went back, did some research on things, and kind of like where the butterfly flapped its wings, right? So for those of you that don't know the story, all right, so it kind of all started with an Orlando Sentinel article back in 1994 written by the late Jerry Green, all right? And Sloan had a quote. Steve Sloan was the UCF athletic director. And at the time, this was dated July 22nd, 1994. You can still read it on the Sentinel website. I linked to it. Green wrote about how the Metro Conference, which at that time was about to merge with the Great Midwest Conference, then again creating something that that Green called quote something like a super middle class conference, which eventually became Conference USA. All right. South Florida at the time, which didn't have football at the time, but did have basketball. Now, Southern Miss, Tulane, Louisville, VC. They were thinking about VCU, UNC Charlotte, and a bunch. You go back and you can see like the usual suspects. Anyway, at the time, it was thought that Prime Network, which owned Sunshine Network, which was covering UCF sports at the time and still exists now in terms of Fox Sports Sun, would maybe they would kind of elbow the powers that be and like, hey, UCF, Metro Conference USA, maybe in 1994, and UCF AD Steve Sloan said, quote, "One problem is that our football schedules are already pretty full through 1999. At that time, UCF was moving. They were still D1 AA, but they were moving up to D1A. Okay, and they were moving up as an independent. And then he went on to say, quote, "We are more inclined to be an independent for about 5 years," end quote, Sloan said. He continues, "and then see if we are attractive to the SEC or ACC." This is in July 1994. God bless Steve Sloan. He did a lot of good things at UCF when he was there. He was the AD when I was a student there before Steve Orsini came in. But that, looking back on it, that was one of the dumbest quotes in the history of the University of Central Florida. I don't know if he was trying to angle for the Big East at the time or what, but it didn't work out. So UCF joined as an independent in 96. They would remain independent until 2002 when they finally joined the MAC for football, stayed in the Atlantic Sun for everything else until UCF finally actually did join Conference USA in 2005. So that's where we pick up the story. And I kind of wrote this thing about how if UCF joined Conference USA, how would it be different? They would be, and for those of you who are asking, I replaced Army with UCF in Conference USA in the 90s. There was a time when Army was in there and then they left, but and so I just decided, you know what, the heck with it. Let's just have some fun. Dante Culpepper finishes third in the Heisman, gets drafted by the Miami Dolphins. UCF wins their first bowl game in 1998 and their first conference title. Mike Kruzek, his career ends successfully at UCF. Ryan Schneider's career ends successfully. The war on I-4 becomes a thing. We still get the on-campus stadium, obviously, but earlier. We get the new arena earlier. UCF solidifies some local commitments. Then I decided, why not? While we're going here, let's bring Steve Spurrier in as UCF's head coach, replacing Mike Kruzek in 2005. We need a new basketball coach. All right, so Kirk Spiraw leaves to take the open job at Iowa in 2007, his alma mater. So let's take on Chris Collins from Duke, and Carolyn Peck coaches the women's team. And we still have the Power 6 conferences in 2014, which, and I have it all there in the article. I don't want to list them all out, but there's quite a bunch. I always thought that, you never know, right? A butterfly flaps its wings somewhere west of the Sahara, and the Hurricane turns out to be a 12-team Big East that still has a lot of the old powers in it, but with some of the newer powers in it, and the Big Ten maybe gets Notre Dame somehow, and maybe Mizzou and Kansas decide to go to the Big Ten or something like that. Anyway, it was fun. Murph, you, like I said, quote fact end quote checked it. And you were like, I loved your tweet. You're like 90% WTF and like 10%, this is kind of fun. I don't know. Go back and take a look. If you could tell Steve Sloan something in 1994, what would you tell him?
I'd tell him to do this.
Shut up and join the conference, man. Make a call.
Look what's happening. Just take a 25-year time machine with me to the future, and look what's happened.
Right.
But I get a kick out of like the little things in this article, like first of all, UCF, because they're in the Big East now and they're winning consistently, seemingly dominates local recruiting. So Jeff Driscoll never goes to Florida. He ends up being a quarterback at UCF as the Gatorade National Player of the Year because he went to Haggerty and he goes to UCF. And because Jeff Driscoll goes to UCF, UCF still lands Blake Bortles, but Blake Bortles is a tight end. Sure, Blake Bortles is a tight end. Why not? Tony Michel is now a running back for UCF.
Hey, South Florida.
Darius Washington, the old Memphis star, and this is now at UCF because he's local. I liked the fact that it was like, UCF, not only they're good and they're winning all these games, and you got to read it. Like, for those of you who haven't read it, like, boy, oh boy, is UCF successful. Like, they're so successful that
don't spoil it. Don't spoil it.
No, Jeff there's like some basketball success that we would cut off our left arm for that Jeff just sort of glosses over because we're so much better than this. We Sweet 16, that's nothing. We just make Sweet 16s like the Dickens. It's fine. And I like those things, like how we dominate recruiting and how successful we are. Like, again, all of it is just fun. It's the perfect sort of time waster in this moment. And that's a compliment because that's what we need right now. We need things to take our mind off of things. And I thought, as for 5,000 words, that's going to take you a solid 45 minutes to an hour. That was a lot of fun. And yeah, spoiler, UCF does really well.
Thank you, Murph. That means a lot.
I enjoyed reading it too.
Tell me about it. All right. Obviously, we know, like, Drew, like, the whole, like, what would you have done differently? Looking back on it, like, I was really thinking about it. It was really kind of painful kind of writing because, like, man, where did we go wrong here? You know what I mean?
Where didn't we go wrong? Basically, my message to Steve Sloan in the Wayback Time Machine is make a decision. Now do the opposite.
Right.
I mean, it was just one like bad move after another, a complete, hubris right there. But no, I actually enjoyed reading this. I always like playing the what if thing with conference realignment. I mean, the old games of NCAA football, you can mess around with the conferences, so that was fun. I think you jumped the shark a little bit with every local talent known to man stays home.
Listen, I was really trying. I honest to God, as I was looking at this, I was really trying to see if I could find a way for UCF to land Amari Stoudemire out of Cypress Creek High School. I was really trying to do that.
Stop!
I couldn't make it happen.
But in all seriousness,
could Chris Collins have convinced Dwight Howard to play for UCF instead of going to the NBA?
Oh boy, yeah. Completely going off the deep end, but no. In all seriousness, it's a fun read until you get to the end where it just goes completely off the wall, and UCF becomes the greatest school known to mankind. Ohio State and Florida bow in reverence towards their greatness, but it made me think for a moment because there was one stat, and I posted a comment on Facebook about it. There was one move that UCF made. It was a bit of a head scratcher at the time. But when you think about this whole Conference USA bit, maybe this would have played a role. A few years prior, UCF had a 1-year stint in the Sun Belt Conference when their old conference, the America South, merged.
Right.
So what if they stayed and the basketball and baseball and all of them don't go into purgatory in the TAC? They stay in the Sun Belt, which actually had, D1 schools instead of, wannabe D1 schools at the time. Would we be in a different situation now? Because that's partly what helped USF when they got their biggest invite is they had Conference USA already very much ingrained and had their facilities up to par and their programs up to par where UCF really didn't. Mm-hmm. And I know
people forget how old the Sun Dome is, right?
Oh, it's
that place has been around for a long time, and that's part of the reason why they got in.
Yeah, exactly. And in fact, the year that UCF merged into the Sun Belt was the year that South Florida left to go join the Metro. So I even though UCF was always one step behind, I think that would have played a role in making it happen because as you mentioned, Army was a charter member through 2004. They were terrible. They hated it. And that's why they basically told the AAC, thanks, but no thanks on conference affiliation. I just want to take that one little step further in the what if time machine on what if UCF stayed in the Sun Belt Conference.
Well, let me run down for you. Okay, so the Sun Belt at the time, the 1 year that UCF was in the Sun Belt, all right, here's who else was in the Sun Belt. New Orleans, all right, South Alabama, Western Kentucky, Arkansas State, Arkansas Little Rock, Lamar, Louisiana Tech, Louisiana, and UTPA, Texas Pan American. Sun Belt football did not actually start until 2001? Yeah, 2001. And when it did start, it had they don't have football there, but Arkansas State. I'm looking at this chart here on Wikipedia. You're gonna have to forgive me. Arkansas State, Louisiana, FIU didn't join for football until a couple years later. Middle Tennessee, New Mexico State, North Texas, Idaho, and Louisiana Monroe. That's a lot of traveling. I mean, could you imagine going out to New Mexico State, going out to Idaho in the Sun Belt in like the early 2000s? That would have been brutal. Now UCF, I think, would have dominated that league possibly because we saw how good UCF football was in 2000. That sort of 01, 02, 03. Well, 03 things kind of fell apart.
Let's forget
03
about
kind of fell apart. Yeah, but that 02 team was really talented. And it was just kind of out there in the ether. Exactly. They were just unlucky. People forget how that team. It's the first year in the MAC. They missed out on a MAC championship berth by one game, and that game turned out to be their game at Marshall that they lost by 5 points. And it was a game that UCF had 4 possessions inside the Marshall 50 in the fourth quarter and came away with 0 points out of any of them. So, throw that team in the Sun Belt and see what happens. Now, I think that's interesting because then maybe they could have moved up to, maybe they do launch in the Sun Belt in football, or maybe they move up to. I don't know what that looks like, but I don't know. That's interesting. Drew, do you want to pound out 5,000 words on that? I got room.
Well, the problem is you kind of took most of the thunder on that, and we're only talking about a handful of years because I'll be honest, if they stay in the Sun Belt, they probably would have been one of those charter, or very close to a Conference USA members. I don't think it would be, going into football, as a member of the Sun Belt Conference. I would love to know from somebody like what Brandon
Helwig, our friend Brandon Helwig, UCFsports.com, said UCF obviously had an open invite to join the Sun Belt. I'm assuming he means in football only because I posted this article, he replied to it. But went with the MAC primarily because of Marshall and what they've been able to do in the late 90s with Randy Moss, Chad Pennington, Brian Leftwich, etc. It seemed like a better short-term solution and not as degrading as aligning oneself with Louisiana Monroe, Arkansas State, etc. But that doesn't answer the question of what if they stayed in it in 1992, So,
not only that, but from what I understand, it was also because the MAC asked first. And if I recall, I believe UCF made a comment of we wanted to honor our commitments, which is admirable, but not necessarily the best move when you look at your long-term benefits. I mean, TCU, found a way to back out and not lose all their honor when they left the Big East for the Big 12. I think UCF dropped the ball here a little bit. I think they could have ended up in a better situation if they just kind of took the dive, for lack of a better term.
Well, I mean, I think the thought at the time was, well, geez, what's this new league even going to look like? Is this the Sun Belt 2.0? I mean, is it the Sun Belt except without all of the tradition? And obviously that bore out to be incorrect. I mean, it wasn't like this Conference USA had a reputation before because, well, guess what? It was a completely new conference. So it was interesting. Brandon also mentioned, he said, I'm not sure the quote UCF turned down CUSA end quote narrative was reality, and that there was truly something to turn down. Though Sloan obviously did UCF no favors by making the, quote, we're really not that into you comments here. I know it was a popular talking point for Gene McDowell during the late 90s because it was trying to portray the image that UCF was, quote, better than CUSA and poised for inclusion in a BCS league like the Big East. Well, that didn't work out. So, by the way, if aside from all that, I guess, Andrew, it's true. I'll go with your what if UCF stayed in the Sun Belt. Murph, what's your biggest UCF what if ever?
The greatest UCF what if ever?
Yes.
God, see, this is why Eric probably should be on the show. I'm so much less of a historian than Eric.
This is why I want to ask you, because I think I know what Eric's going to say. I don't know what you're going to say.
I don't know what I'm going to say.
Right.
So I hate these questions. How about Drew go first? I'll try to think of one.
Well, Drew, you're going with the Sun Belt, right? What if they stay in the Sun Belt, or are you going something different?
I'm going to go with the what if they opted not to take the MAC invitation for another conference? Skip the MAC.
Skip the MAC. And stay independent in 2002? Or
well, they said they had an invite from Conference USA. I'd have to double check that real quick. There's some clarification, double checking that.
Right.
But I do recall them making the comment of receiving a conference invite, but it was after the fact of accepting the MAC. So what if they spurned the MAC for Conference USA going into the 2002 season?
There is an article here. I just searched it. Orlando Sentinel, October 16, 2001. It was written by Alan Schmadtke. Okay. So this is the article where UCF joined the MAC. It says here, school officials learned in rapid succession that Conference USA had tabled plans for immediate expansion, and then that Marshall had recommitted its football program to the Mid-American Conference, clearing the way for UCF to join the MAC for the 2002 season. The move is for football only. UCF has sought... Okay, blah, 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 blah. Last year, UCF spent $40,000 to market its program to the SEC, ACC, Big East Conference USA, and MAC. Only the MAC, intrigued by, among other things, UCF's TV contract with Sunshine Network, showed a glimmer of interest. So, yeah, I don't know. I would be interested to find out if Conference USA put something on the table. CUSA, it says here at the bottom, CUSA's new contract with ABC guarantees the league a 7-figure payday if it can stage a conference title game. Commissioner Mike Slive of Conference USA at the time said the contract made expansion, quote, a front burner issue. But in its meeting Monday in Fort Worth, CUSA's board of directors tabled any movement on expansion for football until February. By NCAA rules, CUSA would have to add a 12th member to have such a game. This season, the conference has 10 members. South Florida is set to begin play as the 11th member in 2003. Navy has now said it wants a conference home for its football program, and Army is a football-only member of Conference USA. Conference USA. I want to see who joined at that time. I want to see 2000. What's this? 2001, 2002-ish, right? So South Florida.
TCU was the last team to join.
Well, TCU joined in 2001. So that was before that. So they running with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. They ran with 11 teams until 2005. So how about that?
Crazy world, huh?
I'm just double checking my math. 9, 10, 11. Yeah. Jeez. Isn't that something? I wonder, like, are you right? Are you right about that, Drew? Did UCF? Some UCF historian, Bill Beekman, if you're out there, help me out. Did they have an invite to Conference USA? But Sloan was like, you know what? The MAC called us first. Boy, oh boy, would that be a story? Murph, you've had plenty of time to think on it. What's your thought?
Yeah, it was probably something I should have written last week, but as it's sort of been my MO lately, I didn't. It was probably what if UCF did actually hire Dino Babers and not Scott Frost? Because that obviously you could say like, well, maybe they still win those games. Yeah, they win those games, possibly. You don't know. But they also changed their entire approach offensively. Like UCF fast never becomes a thing.
Right.
And this whole, the people are transferring out of UCF. You look at like Jalen Robinson, who's named Flash, nicknamed Flash, the Oklahoma transfer. He came here because the style they run, started by Frost, now carried over by Heupel, is attractive to a lot of kids. And you can quibble on, well, they still have been successful. Yeah, would they have been that successful? Would they have been that successful to beat a Memphis team in a conference championship game that had Darrell Henderson and Anthony Miller and Patrick Taylor? Maybe not. And then that's obviously got financial ramifications, national ramifications, narrative ramifications. So yeah, that's probably a big one. And people forget. They probably forget, but there was a point in November of 2015 where Dino Babers was reported was going to be named the UCF head coach, and then that sort of collapsed over the ensuing hours. But it was close. It was certainly close, and it would have changed a lot for UCF. If nothing else, it would have changed the way UCF fans watch their team play football.
Okay, I've got another really good what if for you guys that nearly happened.
Okay.
What if George O'Leary was fired after the death of Eric Plancher and Charlie Strong was hired?
Now that's
a good one.
That's a good one. That's a really good one. And
because it almost happened.
I know it almost happened. And people don't realize how close it came to happening. Man, that is a really good one. Who knows if 2013 even happens, right? I mean,
George.
Does Teddy Bridgewater come to UCF?
There would probably be no George O'Leary statue standing outside of the club area.
No.
Well, he would have been tarred and feathered and run out of town at that point.
Yeah.
Right. So I don't know. It's really It's really interesting. UCF always seems to be right in the middle of these big what ifs. There are I don't know. Maybe this will turn into a what if one day because we got some news we wanted to go through. And Murph, you had kind of the big story. I thought, well, two big stories that popped in. One on a return and one on a departure. I guess we'll start with the departure. Joe Sheridan is among 4 UCF baseball players whose names are in the transfer portal. It's kind of a surprise, I think, to a lot of UCF fans out there. Some of the guys, the other 3 guys are J.J. Gonzalez, Jacob Reynolds, and Elijah McCormick, who were all true freshmen who didn't appear in a game last season. But with Joe, it's a bit of a surprise because he's a grad transfer, obviously.
Right. So yeah, I shouldn't say he finished his redshirt junior year because no one finished, but he was a redshirt junior, but he's going into the portal as a graduate transfer, which is important for this personally. First of all, because today, as expected, the D1 Council did not grant the one-time transfer waiver to athletes of this year. It'll be picked up again in January. We were all worried about, after spring sports were shut down, that this would be visited, that the NCAA would grant a one-time no penalty waiver to athletes, and there'd be like a free agency session over the summer. That's not going to happen for most players. But if you're a grad transfer, obviously you can still leave and go to your school of your choice and play right away. I was told by someone in the program that this was a surprising move. But and I mentioned this in the article that I wrote on Jeffrey, on Joe Sheridan last weekend. I talked to him before the season because remember, he came back this year from a really long layoff due to a torn left labrum, his throwing shoulder, where basically he went 20 months between pitching on a UCF mound. And one of the quotes in here I thought was kind of illuminating. And if we're trying to find out like why Joe was doing this, I asked him what that 2018 season was like, and he goes, quote, "A big part of it was I was probably hurt for most of the second half of the season. The second week of conference against Memphis was kind of the first time I was throwing the ball, and I was like, oh boy, I don't really know what's going on here. I was throwing it, and I just had no idea what my body was doing or where it was going. I was trying to battle that for the second half of the season." Now UCF did sort of pull him back a little bit during that time, but he basically pitched up through the end of the regular season. We didn't get word that he was down for the rest of the year until the regular season had ended. So he pitched quite a few starts, obviously injured. And I wonder if there is some animosity with that from Joe toward the program, that they sort of, either did not diagnose him correctly or did diagnose him and still let him go out there thinking that it wouldn't be that bad. If we're looking for reasons why Joe Sheridan is leaving, because let's not forget, he's a Oviedo kid who went to Haggerty. He grew up watching UCF baseball. This is really the team of his childhood, and now he's leaving. There has to be a reason there. If we're just sort of, picking it reasons out of the air. I think that sort of thing he told me might be somewhat illuminating insofar as he may be a little upset with how they handled him in 2018.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I wish we could get a hold of him and see what the deal is. But I know that when they're in the transfer portal, obviously it's basically like an unspoken blackout. Is that right? It's not like it's not like the space between your senior year of football and then the draft, right?
No, it's not. And he can now talk to any school he wants. He can also come back to UCF. This could just be him as a grad transfer, sort of exploring his options and seeing, what else is out there. And if he wants to come back, he can come back. Same with those 3 freshmen who can come back too. Although I've been told that they're definitely leaving, and that makes sense because they did not play this year. And with all of the things going on with college baseball, the extra year of eligibility, the high schoolers coming in, and the very, very limited draft, the 5-round MLB draft, you're going to have a ton of players, a huge roster crunch all across the nation. If you're a guy who's never played or hasn't played yet, you're not facing even more competition heading into 2021. And you're like, maybe I should go somewhere where I know I'm going to play. And I think for a lot of kids, that's going to end up being the JUCO ranks before they come back to the D1 level. For Joe, we'll see. I would love to reach out to him, but I know that that's probably not possible at this moment. I'm sure whenever this is finished, and UCF fans have been through this with star players recently. We remember Ray Alejo and Dallas Beaver.
Yeah.
It feels a little sharper because he is a UCF fan, and he's a
fan favorite, certainly.
Sorry, say again?
No, I was going to say he's certainly a fan favorite.
Yeah, absolutely. So it stings a little bit more, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Well, I mean, whatever decision Joe decides to make, I know that, we know him enough to say he's going to make the right decision for him, and that's cool. So, I mean, I'm sad to see him go personally, but, wherever he feels comfortable closing out his career, he deserves to do that on his terms. So, meanwhile, there was a return, some good news, right, on the basketball side, sort of.
Expected, I think, but Darin Green Jr. is officially back for his sophomore season at UCF.
Look, man, it's COVID-19. We will take as much good news as we can get.
So Darin declared for the NBA draft, the testing the waters, quote unquote, to declaring for the draft back in April. He was in there for about a month, and then basically the word came down a few days ago that he is coming back for his sophomore year. This is not unexpected. This was kind of what we all thought was going to happen, was he was going to go sort of get an evaluation on his talents, which wouldn't cost him anything. He would get an evaluation on his talents and go from there. I'd love to know what his process was like. I'm in the effort right now of trying to get him to do an interview as well. I think that's a little more easier than getting Joe Sheridan to talk at this moment. But I'd love to know what Darin's last month was like. But anyway, he's back. And kind of mixing in with a team that returns a lot of young kids. It's nice to have him back. What we don't know yet is the status of Colin Smith. Now, Colin also declared for the draft, although he didn't put out a statement. He didn't really want to make a big deal of it. He did declare for the draft, testing the waters. But we don't have word as to where he stands, whether he does plan to turn pro or come back to UCF. I mean, the hunch is he would come back, but you don't know. He does have 1 year of eligibility remaining. And another thing to know here is that there was a deadline for players who had declared for the draft, those who had eligibility to come back to college and retain that eligibility. The deadline was June 3rd. Mm-hmm. Well, that's now out the window because last weekend the NCAA basically scrapped it because since the NBA has basically indefinitely postponed its combine and postponed the draft lottery, the NCAA, I guess, didn't seem it was fair to have this deadline for early entry kids. So there is no deadline for early entry kids to come back to school. It's kind of wide open right now. However, I guess going back to something we brought up in the first segment, with teams now being allowed to practice voluntarily on campus together, I wonder if that means you have a lot of guys coming back in June. Certainly, again, for schools in Florida like UCF, they're more open than others. So UCF men's basketball, if they wanted to, could have a June practice as a team this month, and maybe that brings Colin Smith back. I don't know, but we'll see.
That's interesting that he decided not to make a particularly big hullabaloo about it. Because UCF rolled out the red carpet for Darin Green. They're like, yeah, check it out. And then when they brought, all right, Darin, and then when he came back, like, all right, Darin's back.
I think it's just whatever the player wants, right? Respecting his wishes. I think they probably Darin told them, and they may have brought up the option of like, look, would you like to make an official statement? And he said yes, and that's what we got in April. And then maybe they did Colin the same favor, and he just said no. But I do know that Colin is in the draft so far. We just don't know of his status of whether he's officially come back or if he's still looking at his options, getting evaluated, etc.
Right. All right. So we'll be keeping an eye on that as well, and hopefully that it would be nice to have obviously both of them back if and when college basketball season does fire up coming up, because UCF's going to need all the help we can get, especially the veteran help. All right, so that'll kind of bring us to the end here. Murph, what else you got possibly working on this week?
I got things, Jeffrey.
You got things.
I do still want to look back at the UCF baseball season, which people may not remember. Back in March, I did an article about the superlatives for UCF men's basketball season.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to do the same thing for UCF baseball. Haven't done it yet, but even though they only played 18 games, there was a lot to look back upon and sort of revel in. So I'd like to do that. And I probably should at some point roll out a Ben Lively update. Again, Ben Lively is pitching, I think, on Friday, which would be early Friday morning for us. But hopefully he wins that start and gets on the board, because then I could have something good to write about Ben Lively. It's been a rough, sort of unlucky and then also painful 3 starts for Ben Lively in the KBO, but I'm still watching. It's fun.
All right. Drew, you got any ideas that you want to throw around there? What you got?
Oh, boy. That's a tough one, because right now it's more of just keep an eye on what's going on. We got June 1st right around the corner. Are they coming back? Are they not?
Right. Well, we got 11 days to figure it out. And
well, I think we'll know. I think there certainly will be a guideline by UCF before then. We'll also know about the sort of return dates possible for the other sports, the non-basketball, non-football sports. That's coming within the next week as well. And so we'll see. But I do think that we'll know what UCF their sort of guidelines before June 1st.
Yeah, and then after that, it's kind of this uncomfortable 2 weeks of waiting. And seeing if the measures we put in place from the middle of March through to the middle of May worked, or is there a resurgence of the virus? When the economy opens back up and people are interacting with each other on a face-to-face basis. I don't know. I really do hate using the words unprecedented because I think it's so overused, but I mean, for us, it really is unprecedented. We've never been in this kind of a situation before, and there's a lot of people having to make some really tough decisions, and I'm just glad that we get to talk about sports for a little bit to try and entertain you guys. All right, so Andrew, what's your Twitter handle so people can yell at you?
You can yell at me all that you want at StatBoyDrew on Twitter. I enjoy it. I revel in it.
Thank you. So do I. Jeff_Sharon. And of course, Brian, you are at?
I'm at folks_Murphy. You can yell at me too. I don't revel in it. I usually mute people, but that's fun.
That's
Boo!
Great. Yeah, Brian's the professional between us and doing this.
Professional, not in my vocabulary.
Guys, thank you so much for joining me here. And thank you to you for listening. If you have anything that you want to hit us up with, blackgoldbanneret@gmail.com is our email address. I don't promote that enough. I probably should. Send us some questions. I'd love to read some on-air questions for you and have us answer them on our next show. I wish we did that a little bit more, but turns out we talk a lot about the news that's happening. You can also follow us on Twitter as a collective at UCF_Banneret. Don't forget Facebook.com/blackandgoldbanneret. And of course, blackandgoldbanneret.com, your home for UCF sports on the SB Nation Network. For Andrew Gluchov and Brian Murphy, I'm Jeff Sharon saying thank you so much. Continue to stay safe out there. This has been the Black and Gold Banneret Podcast.